About a week ago, I was cleaning up after the Fireside Tales New Year's party, and I came across a folder at the bottom of the drawer that was written by a Maryland and Simon Harker. I began to read through it, and I was intrigued. I went to my superiors, and I did my own research, and I was able to find out that, as absurd as it sounded, all of it was true. And let me stress that again. This story is very absurd. But something I've found out about facts is that facts don't care if they sound absurd or not. Facts are facts, and I guess sometimes we just have to accept them as they are. But anyways, I want you all to keep that in mind as you hear this tale. And it begins under political turmoil. Bartholomew Boulevard had managed to catch a spy that had been in his midst. This spy was a member of a group of youthful protesters. And Bartholomew was very lucky to have caught this spy, and it was mostly because of the Darkwood police force, led by John Harker. Bartholomew was so grateful that he invited John to his house for dinner 3 weeks from them after he got back from Africa, and John agreed. When the night arrived, John had his daughter and Simon, his son, get dressed, and they all started heading down. And as they were going down the road, Marilyn said, "Don't forget to pick up Flint. You know, he was a big part of solving this case, too." And John Harker said, "Yes, of course, Flint." Marilyn smiled at this. John didn't exactly like Marilyn's best friend, Flint. You see, there wasn't much known about this boy. He was about 15 years old, but where he came from and who he was, or who his parents were, anything like that, was rather kept in the shadows, and not even the Darkwood police force knew about it. But Flint had been a big part of solving this case, bigger than most people would ever realize. And John Harker knew that he had to take Flint Burns with him to dinner. So eventually they arrived at his house, and Flint greeted them rather pleasantly. He was dressed in a suit, as he almost always was, a rather dusty suit, and he had that thick British accent of his, and he came in, and Maryland and Simon and them began talking about chess and about some of the books they'd read as they went down the drive. Eventually, they did arrive at the Boulevard mansion. And they came up, and the moment they entered inside, they were greeted by Teresa Boulevard, Bartholomew's wife, and she said, "Oh, it's so good to see you again, John, and Flint Burns, and oh, Maryland, you're looking so beautiful, and Simon, you're the cutest little button. Marissa," and she turned to her daughter, Marissa, who was standing in the corner, "why don't you go ahead and say hello and take their coats?" And Marissa, with a pasted smile, greeted them and took their coats, and Teresa said, "We're trying to teach that girl manners. She's had, well, a bit of problems in the past, but we're hoping that with her cooking now and with her doing some housework, that we might be able to teach her how to be a good person." Well, anyways, they all walked into the dining room, which was a very beautiful place. I won't get too much into the description, but let's just say there was a diamond chandelier and lovely red carpets and a beautiful elm table. And at the end of the table was sitting Bartholomew, and next to him was Wilbert. And the moment Wilbert saw them coming into the room, he got up and with a bubbly laugh said, "Oh, hello, John! Oh, and your two little children! Oh, and Flint!" And he went up and began to shake John's hand, and John shook it rather hesitantly. You see, John and Wilbert weren't the best friends, since John had always suspected Wilbert of being involved with some criminals, but was never able to prove it. Certainly, Wilkes was involved with criminals in his own way. He worked with them in order to catch the criminals. But no one was ever able to prove that he had ever participated in that activity himself. But anyways, they all sat down at the table, and Maryland noticed as she was sitting down that at the far end, sitting at a desk, working, was Bartholomew's son, Aldridge. And Bartholomew actually shouted to Aldridge, "Aldridge, come on, say hello to the guest." And Aldridge stood up and said, hello everyone, and sat back down. Oh, said Bartholomew, it is so hard to teach children manners anymore, you know. But we're trying our best with these two. And anyways, they all began to talk about the case, and Bartholomew said how grateful he was to John and to Wilbert. And eventually Aldrich came and he sat down and he began to just eat the bread. He ate it almost like a monster, sort of just chomping it down and leaving the crumbs and wiping them off. And as they were all looking at him, or at least some of them were, Maryland noticed that there were some cuts across his cheek, and she wondered what had caused this. But as Bartholomew was talking, he looked over, and he was looking at Aldrich as he said this. Yes, sir. I think the thing with these protesters is they don't realize, and I suppose it's not really their fault, but part of the cost of having a military, part of having the cost of having that defense, is that sometimes innocent people must die. Sometimes the innocent must fall as well as the guilty. It's nothing that we like to do, but it is something we have to do. It is the fate of the matter. And Aldrich looked up and scoffed. Yes, said Bartholomew. And I should actually thank my own son here. If it hadn't been for his help, we would never have caught him, that spy. Yes, said Aldrich. You know something, Father? I regret the moment that I did that, telling that spy on you. I suppose that I had to. But look at you, he said. You speak all about how you're protecting people. But it's not really about that. Not when you look deep down into it. It's all a power play. That's all it is, and that's all it will ever be. Well, just as he spoke, Marissa and Teresa came in with the drinks and the food, and they all began to sit back down again, and John Harker actually changed the subject and began to talk about business and things. But Marilyn couldn't help but Aldrich had his eye on his father constantly, even as the martini was handed to him. And finally, Aldrich said, Father, he said, why don't you just admit it? What? Said Bartholomew. That you're wrong? Admit it for the first time in your entire damn life, he said. I mean, look at all the things you've done. Look at the innocent people you have killed. And me, your son, having to live with that. The truth of the matter is that in the end, you're just keeping everyone a slave in ignorance. Look at what you've did to Marissa and me, he said. You make sure that we have to dress a certain way and act a certain way. You keep us here as a punishment. You punish us constantly. But you never reward us for anything. The truth is, you're the devil, said Mortimer, and he raised up his glass. You are the devil, he said, and sat back down again. And Bartholomew stood up and said, How dare you? How dare you say that to me? I have done everything I could to protect you and to protect my family and to protect everyone. I don't want to hurt anyone, and the fact that you would think that I did. And Aldrich, he took a drink and said, Oh, Father, you think yourself so wise, but in the truth, you're no better than anyone else. I want you to remember that. But as Aldrich sat there, he began to cough. And suddenly, he began to fall back down into his chair, and then fall down onto the floor quite suddenly. And everyone just stared at each other for a moment in shock. Marilyn and Simon both remember that. But then everyone rushed forward to see what the hell was the matter. And Aldrich was sitting there, and he seemed to be shaking all around, and Teresa said, My God, he must be having a seizure. He's been poisoned, said Flint Burns. Quick, someone called the hospital. It might be too late. Immediately, Marissa ran to the phone and began to call the hospital, to call 911. And soon enough, the hospital did arrive. But the moment they got him on there, they noticed that he wasn't moving. And Teresa was crying, and the police were beginning to question everybody there, which is always a very hard thing to do, but a necessary thing to do. And as as Aldrich was taken away, Flint Burns saw Marilyn turning towards him, and Marilyn asked, What do you think happened here, Flint? I don't know, said Flint. Somebody wanted Aldrich dead. The question is who. He sat there thinking about it and said, I think that I have a theory about what exactly here occurred, but I can't be certain. I wouldn't want to input my decision quite soon. Marilyn, I have a thing to ask for you, and it's a matter of life and death. Would you and Simon come to Wilbert Wilkes' house with me? I assure you, you're in no danger. And Marilyn said, Of course, Flint. Do you think you can solve this case, too? And Flint said, I'm certain of it. Well, anyways, Flint and everyone else was questioned, and eventually the whole thing was done, and John Harker said that he couldn't imagine who could have done it, but that his money was on Marissa, since she was the only one that could have administered the poison, and from what it sounded like, Wilbert Wilkes had not been in the kitchen. He hadn't even been to the bathroom. All he had ever been in was the dining room with Bartholomew, so it seemed impossible that Wilbert could have done it, although Marilyn couldn't be so certain. Well, anyways, the next day, Marilyn and Simon got up, and rather without their father's permission, leaving at 5 o'clock in order to make sure that he didn't hear them, they went and they visited Wilkes' house, where Flint Burns was standing by. And Flint said, Simon, I need you to do something for me. And he whispered into Simon's ears for a moment, and Simon nodded his head and said, Sure thing. And anyways, they went up to the house, and Flint Burns knocked at the door, and Wilbert Wilkes answered. Oh, hello, he said. Wilbert didn't look like he had much sleep that night, but then, of course, none of them had. And he said, What can I do for you children? Said Flint. Wilbert, we need to talk to you about the murder. You mind if we come inside? And Wilbert said, Yes, of course. And they all went in. And Flint said, Simon, if you don't mind just staying here in the foyer, this is really adult talk. So they all went into the living room, Flint and Marilyn and Wilbert, and Flint said, I can't imagine who could have done this thing, but I have a feeling that it must have been Marissa. And Wilbert said, Well, we know that it was a poisoning. We're pretty sure of that. From what I hear, the autopsy came back and said it was iodine. But of course, we can't be certain who was the killer. I can't imagine it could have been anyone but Marissa. There were only 3 people in that house for all that time that Martini was in there. And it was Marissa, Bartholomew, and Teresa, and Aldrich. And really, that Martini there could have been put in any of them at any time during that 3-week period. Well, anyways, Flint Burns seemed to be thinking about this, and he said, Well, I can't imagine I knew Marissa. I don't think she would ever have committed such a crime. But just then they heard a noise, something crashing down below. What's that? Said Wilbert. And he started to run, and he broke out into quite a run as he ran back, and he ran down into the basement, too quick for Flint or Marilyn to catch him. And when he stopped, he yelled, Simon! What's going on here? Flint came running down with Marilyn and said, Oh, Simon, you naughty boy, I apologize, Wilbert. He must have been running around. And Simon said, Oh, I'm so sorry. And Wilbert looked over at the chemistry set that was open. I was just curious, said Simon. Oh, yes, said Wilbert. Allow me to explain. This is a chemistry set that I've been using here recently. I've been very into it. I'm always around those forensic people. I thought I'd put my finger into it. I'm not very good, as you can see. They have by those burn marks on the couch, he said, pointing over at them. You see, I was putting together 2 rather harmless chemicals, and it caused an explosion somehow. I don't know why exactly, but like I said, I've never been very good at this. Anyways, I very well hope that you children will be all right. I know it must be terrifying to have seen a dead body like that, but I assure you the police will be able to handle it. And anyways, Flint said, Well, that's really all we had to discuss with you anyways. We better be going. And Flint Burns, rather hurriedly actually, ran out with Noah and Simon. And Simon said, I was able to find it, and there was nothing there, Flint. And Flint said, Yes, I expected as much, but what did the label say? And he told him for Simon to whisper into his ear, and Flint Burns nodded his head. Yes, that would make sense now, wouldn't it? And he sort of laughed to himself and then said, Come on, we have one more place to visit. and we must be quick about it. Anyways, soon they arrived at a bicycle shop, and Flint Burns explained as they came towards it. Mortimer was very much involved with Aldrich. You see, he was the one that had caused the cuts, but Aldrich said that he didn't want to press charges. Apparently, Mortimer wasn't very happy when he found out that Aldrich had exposed his spy. So, you think that he might have something to do with it? Said Marilyn. There's only one way to find out, said Flint, and he opened the door, and they found Mortimer sitting there working on a bicycle, and when he saw them, he said, "Hello, do you kids want anything, you want any bicycle or anything like that? What you here for?" And Flint said, "No, actually, we wanted to talk about joining that cult of yours, that, cult of the Mesmer." "Oh," said, Mortimer, "well, we don't really call it a cult, we call it a club. We believe that mesmerism, or hypnosis, is a way to reach a new meditative understanding of the universe," said Mortimer. I can give you all brochures," and he went behind his desk and he fumbled around for a second, and then he handed them the brochures, and Flint said, "That's very interesting. Now, would you tell us why exactly you put the poison in Aldrich's glass?" And Mortimer looked at them. "I did no such thing. You're the same as those police. They came questioning me. I had nothing to do with it, and I couldn't have had anything to do with it. I haven't been around that house for 3 weeks." And he said, "Now you kids get out of here. No more questions." And he started to push them towards the door, and Flint said, "Now come on, Mortimer. We just wanted to talk a little bit." "I said get out," said Aldrich. I said Mortimer, and he pushed them out the door. And Marilyn said, "Well, that didn't go very well." "It went perfectly," said Flint Burns as he looked through the brochure. "Well, I think that I have everything that I need." And he started to walk away, and Simon said, Now wait a minute, we haven't discovered anything." "That's right," said Marilyn. "Who was it that put the poison in Aldrich's glass?" And Flint turned to them. "Well, I can give you all 2 clues. The first is this. Marissa Boulevard was by herself plenty of times and had plenty of opportunities to put that poison in that cup in any of that 3-week period. Plenty of time." "And the second clue," said Simon, "is that there was hypnosis involved, wasn't there? I bet somebody hypnotized someone, isn't that right?" And Flint Burns smiled at Simon. "That is correct. But I will remind you all that hypnosis doesn't work that way. Someone can't be hypnotized to do something that they don't want to do. They can only be hypnotized to do something they are comfortable with." And Flint Burns turned away and then began to walk off. "Now, if you all excuse me, I have to speak with Marissa. I believe we might be able to get the answer to this much quicker than we think." And so Marilyn and Simon were left to ponder this mystery, as they did the rest of that night. And I believe that if John Harker were to ever find out that they were working with Flint this way, he would have been quite mad. But I'm going to let you all decide what the mystery is. Think it over for a few seconds, and I'll give you the answer here in a moment. But just try to figure it out for yourselves. That night, as the Harkers were sitting and having dinner, the phone rang, and John Harker went to pick it up. Marilyn and Simon both can distinctly remember what their father said as he spoke to the phone. "Yes, hello? What? Oh, hello, Flint. You have the mystery solved. You want me and Marilyn and Simon to go down to the Boulevard mansion. Now, look here, Flint, you shouldn't be getting yourself into this. You could get yourselves killed. Besides, we've solved the case. We believe it had to have been Marissa Boulevard. Yes, she did pass her lie detector test, but you still want us to come down." "I'm not doing it, Flint. You can forget it. Goodbye." They heard the phone slam, and John went back to eat. And as they sat there, Marilyn said, "Father, are we going to go?" "Let's just finish dinner," said John. They did indeed go into their car and start driving off, and John Harker mumbled about being manipulated and that Flint was playing him like a chess piece. But soon enough they arrived at the Boulevard mansion, and the moment they came in, they found that Bartholomew was sitting there with Flint and Marissa and was being reassured. You say you know who killed my son, he said, with eyes tearful. Yes, said Flint, and you don't have to worry. It wasn't Marissa. Well, not exactly. And Teresa said, It's not Marissa. I'm absolutely certain of it. My daughter would never have killed our son, she said. And Marissa said, It's going to be all right. We figured out exactly what happened. Well, anyways, as John came in, Flint said, I'm glad you're here. I think that we need to fence right now. You did bring your gun. And John Harker nodded his head. Good. Now we have a few more guests to wait for. Soon enough, only actually a few minutes after John, Wilbert came into the room. And Wilbert looked around and Flint said, Wilbert, please sit down. We've found out everything. Well, anyways, Wilbert looked like he wanted to run away, but John Harker was standing there with his gun by his side, so Wilbert sat down. And eventually another pair of headlights came up, and Mortimer came into the room. And Mortimer, the moment that he came around, he pulled out his gun. All right. I don't know what's going on, but I didn't have anything to do with his death. Not anything. And Flint said, Mortimer, please, put the gun away. We know exactly what happens, and you're just making a fool of yourself. Now, I don't like what's going on here. Marissa, I can't believe you lied to me. For the best reasons, said Marissa. Now, please, do as Flint says and sit down. Mortimer looked into Marissa's eyes for a moment, and finally he sat down, and Flint said, Good. First off, I'm glad that you are all here. Now, I know this has been a horrible matter. I know that your son's death, he said, and he said this to Bartholomew, has been about the worst nightmare that could have happened. However, I'm here to say today that, in the end, no one was truly innocent, and no one was truly guilty, either. Here is what I believe happened. Wilbert, where exactly did you buy that chemistry set? And Wilbert said, I don't see why that would matter, because you are the one that gave that potion to Mortimer here, said Flint. I don't know what you're talking about, said Wilbert. Oh, don't play dumb, said Flint. I talked to the person that sold you that chemistry set. You didn't get it the honest way, did you? Something like that cost $200, maybe $300, maybe less dollars, and you wanted a little cheaper of a way to buy it. So you bought one from a salesman in the corner of the street, thinking nothing of it. But in truth, that was your great mistake. Mortimer and you were the ones that gave Marissa the potion, and Marissa was the one who administrated it, but not in the way that all of you think. What are you getting at here, Flint? Said John. Just this, said Flint, that Marissa Boulevard here was hypnotized by Mortimer to put that potion in the drink. And John and all of them were just silent for a second, and John and Bartholomew finally said, That's the most absurd thing I've ever saw. Why are you doing this to me, my boy, after all I've been through? Now hold on a minute, said Flint. I know that it sounds ridiculous, but it makes sense. And it's something that we can prove, or at least that I was able to prove, later on. And he pulled out a recording. I was able to get in touch with your people, John Harker, and they were able to find the exact tape. Now, I'm not going to play it all to you, because it's rather long. But the basis of it is that Mortimer was able to give this potion to Marissa. He told her that it was some harmless additive to add to her cooking. Now, he took a risk here. He took quite a gamble. Quite a few gambles, in fact. Expecting that Marissa would not use it, and expecting her to not put it in the drink. But I believe that he must have told her at some point that it was rather a harmless thing. But anyways, Marissa had the potion with her, and he would call her up. Now, Marissa says that he was helping her with cigarettes and smoking, as well as quite another few things, and that he and her had a bit of a relationship going on. I'm not going to get into all of the details of the relationship, but basically enough they had trust. Marissa and Mortimer were constantly in the act of mesmerizing each other to reach its new level of understanding, and Marissa was very used to fulfilling odd requests for Mortimer. One of the odd requests was to pour the potion into the martini glass, which was recorded at being open at the time of the scene. There are plenty of days for him to do this, and he had the acknowledgment of knowing that the party was going to be held. Again, he took quite a risk here, but I believe there was a good reason why he took this risk, and I'll explain it in a moment. Now, I believe that it was done over the phone, right? And that's why we have the recording. So, after she was hypnotized, Mortimer told her to forget that she ever was hypnotized. Now here John Harker stood up. Now hold on a minute there, Flint. This doesn't make any sense. You can't hypnotize someone over the phone. Yes, you can, said Flint Burns. But you can't hypnotize someone to forget they've been hypnotized. Yes, you can. I have something for you, said Marilyn. You can't hypnotize anyone to do something they don't want to do. You can't, said Flint Burns. And again, Marissa didn't believe she was doing anything harmful. She believed that this little potion was just a little adage, some sugared thing, or something like that to put into the drink. And that was the wisdom of the whole thing. Mortimer successfully was able to make Marissa poison him without actually believing it was anything harmful, something that she would easily forget about in her waking state. I assure you, as ridiculous as it sounds, it is entirely possible. In fact, it is a rather intelligent way of poisoning someone, and I wish someone in the past would have thought of it before. But anyways, we come to the final part of this, and that is that I do not believe Mortimer and Wilbert knew they were poisoning Aldrich. You mean they're innocent? Said Bartholomew. Yes, said Flint. You see, the chemistry set I had Simon looked over had an empty slot where it said Diadec on it. Diadec is a substance that allows people to poop. Quite poop a lot, to be honest. I'm sorry to laugh, but I cannot help but find the situation humorous, despite myself. My apologies. But anyways, they, Wilbert and Mortimer, believed that they were just giving Diadect to Aldrich, when really it was actually poison in the glass, misplaced and mislabeled by a group of shady individuals working on the black market. That's why many of your other chemicals, said Flint to Wilbert, didn't work. They were all mislabeled. None of those chemicals are working. I suppose you can look at yourself as much better. And anyways, he said, so there you have it. The whole thing was an innocent mistake. And here Bartholomew stood up. Now wait a minute. You have to be certain of that. Are you sure they didn't realize that it was arsenic in the glass before they gave it to them? Well, said Flint Burns, they couldn't have peeled it off because there was a seal on it. And even if they guessed that it was arsenic, there was no way for them to knowing since it was in the glass. And besides, it was a rather unintelligent way of doing it, getting the potion into the glass by hypnotizing her. It might not have worked. And indeed, I think that Mortimer realized that it was rather a stretch for it to work. Quite a chance on his part. But he figured that it was only Diadect, and it didn't really matter, and that if he succeeded, it was a nice way to get revenge for all that occurred against Aldrich without ever really hurting anyone. And here he smiled at them all. I am sorry that all of this has happened, but I can hope that you can all see that it was just a huge mistake. And anyways, Bartholomew stood up and said, well, I think that the police will have to sort through this matter and make sure of everything, but as far as I can tell, well, Mortimer, he said, I suppose that in the end you are no more innocent or guilty than Marissa or Wilbert in their own way, although I do not think Marissa is truly guilty of much. Here he turned to her. I'm just saying, my daughter, that everyone was a little bit at fault here. Mortimer said, yes, well, I'm going to leave now, if you all don't mind. I haven't really committed any true crime. But as he was turning, Bartholomew said, wait, shake my hand. And Mortimer turned around and said, I don't know. Please, said Bartholomew. And Mortimer walked up and he shook Bartholomew's hand. And then they headed off, all in their own direction. And as they were sitting there talking about it, later, Flint Burns and Maryland, Flint said, it is a shame all that had to have happened. But as they say, the clock chimes death for all men. The clock chimes death for all men.